There we go. Hey, everybody, it's me, JJ Panzer, your smart apartment advisor, back with another weekly client call. It is the end of July, so we don't have a whole lot to discuss. There hasn't been a tremendous change in the market conditions. It feels like everything from a rental standpoint is sort of settling in. People are getting used to where we're at, that there's no demand, and if you have a vacancy, you have to be very flexible, and you have to do whatever you can to try to attract people. If you have an opportunity to keep a tenant who's been reliable, you got to do the best you can with that, and be proactive with negotiations and conversations in that regard. As far as the deferrals that we've received, I can tell tenants are those who have deferred rent because they lost jobs and they really, they deserve that deferral, are nervous about what they're going to do with the past due balances. And I got an email this week from a tenant who had contacted us a couple of months ago asking to defer a portion of her rent because she was collecting benefits and had been unemployed. And she said, I'm still collecting benefits, I'm still unemployed, but what are we going to do about it? And I said, don't feel any pressure from us to address that yet. If you're not employed, you're not in a position to address it. And with the extra bonus benefit possibly expiring at the end of the month and maybe not being extended, we may have some more people who need help. But at this point, we do have a few people who are returning to their regular payments, and we are working diligently to try to collect as much as we can of the past due balances, realizing that the wages that people lost from March through June and July aren't coming back, and that's what people would have used to pay for it in the first place. So we're doing the best we can and working through a backlog of renegotiations on commercial leases, and hopefully we'll get people to the point where they're at least squared away for the rest of the year, and then we'll take a look at what next year looks like in the fourth quarter. With that, I think I want to introduce Denise. I wanted to sort of bring her in and talk a little bit about base rents and these renegotiations that we're doing. Denise, we in previous downturns, we've done the we'll give you a free month's rent to sign a new one-year lease. In previous years where the slide hasn't been quite so pronounced, we've also been able to do that for new tenants, but that isn't really resonating for a lot of people, and as a result, we're simply offering reductions in exchange for a commitment to stay. The reason why we had the reduction or the 3 months rent was to keep the lease rent at the certain price that we originally had it at. Is it time to just sort of get realistic and say this is the market rent, and we're not necessarily, if you're offering a reduction and a new agreement, you're going from $4,000 to $3,500 in rent, that's the new normal and that's going to be the base rent?
Short answer is yes. I think that I've heard enough now from various colleagues that the concern out there, especially with the landlord bar, is that irrespective of how wonderful your relationship is with your tenant, if something goes wrong, the rent board will probably identify on an annualized basis the actual rent based on any freebie or free month rent or cash remittance back to the tenant. So in other words, if you're giving a free month's rent on a 12-month lease at $1,000 a month, they will bake in that $1,000 over the course of the 12 months. So the reality is that the year's rent is actually reduced based on that 1 month free.
Right.
So you're not really helping yourself. You may as well just annualize it and amortize it over the whatever you were going to give, amortize it over the lease.
Right, and avoid having a vacancy that's going to be more costly in the long run. If you have somebody who's going to be able to pay the rent and even at a reduced rate. I think part of it is we have to understand that we've had it really good for a really long time, and sometimes it's not so good, and that's part of this business. I think the entire other issue of deferred rent and not being able to collect on that rent at all, or having to discount that rent, is a whole different bargain than what we've ever had to deal with before. But as far as making deals and offering incentives to keep people in your building, you have to be proactive with that and try to get people to make a commitment to stay. And one thing that we do in our leases and in our renewals is we tell the tenant what the owner is paying to have us write that lease, write that agreement, because it isn't, in most cases, it's not something that we do without a fee. And if the tenant doesn't stay through the term of the lease, we do take the opportunity to charge them the fee to reimburse the owner, because the owner is receiving a value of the 12-month lease, and the tenant has to make an agreement. That's been enforceable in the past, though. We've had one time there was an issue with a tenant saying it's not something you can take out of the security deposit, but it is, allowable. Hopefully that will continue to be the case. Have you had have you seen that issue in the past, people arguing about that fee?
No, I'd say 95% of the time, that fee, because if it's specifically identified as a provision of the lease and not baked into the civil code section of the security deposit, you have a particular obligation at the commencement of the term to agree to that, and that's what the tenant has agreed to. So the burden shifts to the tenant in any dispute resolution to prove how that was not fair. Right. The reality is that as opposed to negating, you don't want to escalate it to dispute resolution, and it may be monetarily beneficial to the landlord to just waive that fee, but it is legitimate.
Right. Right. If they agree to it and it's specifically laid out, here's the fee, it's $2,500 or $3,000, and I'll pay it if I don't stay through July 31st of 2021. It's pretty straightforward, and it's a provision the tenant has agreed to. So that's one way that we try to protect everybody from, giving a rent decrease and then having somebody up and leave anyway. I mean, I suppose even in that circumstance, it's better to have collected a few extra months' rent than have had the tenant leave right away. But at the same time, the tenant's not going to actually be able to pay you open-ended rent until the lease is up, though you can still charge them the rent as well, though at this point we can't enforce that either through the courts because the courts aren't open. Any news or updates on when courts might be open? I mean, look, we're heading for next week to have the hearing for, was it injunctive relief, to immediately get in the way of the anti-eviction ordinance. But what about the courts opening? What's the Judicial Council saying?
So when you say the court's opening, I'm only going to talk about the unlawful detainer actions, right. Because the courts are open. Okay. I'm filing lawsuits all the time. It's just not for eviction.
Right.
So it's my understanding that at the end of August, we will be able to get into court regarding UDs. But okay. Unfortunately, here's an example. A very learned, very sophisticated colleague had a UD pre-COVID in the court system. There was a trial date just at the very beginning of March.
Oh, man.
And long story short, they just went back into court last week because it was pre-COVID.
Right.
And it was all legitimate. It was a non-payment, UD for non-payment. And the judge looked at both parties' counsel and says, I'm not hearing this matter now, come back in 60 days. Ugh. Now, realize that was pre-COVID. So you can imagine what will happen once we are able, assuming that we are going to have the Preston legislation overturned, or I shouldn't say that, the law overturned, and we'll be successful in the Court of Appeal, for example, on the Preston legislation, then it's going to be a huge backlog. And so many people don't have to proceed, depending upon when the rent was deferred, until next February.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's a mess. That's what we've known from the beginning.
Yeah. What I'm seeing too, JJ, not to interrupt you, but I'm seeing a lot more commercial office tenants come to me. There's been just a wave this month, and I don't know if it's because they're realizing, wow, I can really change the way I'm practicing, or what. So pretty soon there's going to be just an abundance of office space available all over the city.
Right.
So that'll be a real change in the complexion of how we do business in San Francisco County.
That will be. And, you know, I'm looking at the deals I'm making with commercial tenants and thinking, you know, thankfully so far, I haven't had too many people just pull the plug and decide they're leaving. We've done our best to be as generous as we possibly can with all of our commercial tenants. But, you know, if we have a lot more closures over the course of the rest of this year and going into next year, I mean, the retail space market, any lease that was written in the last 3 to 5 years is going to be 25 to 50% over what market turns out to be when we're actually able to start opening again. And the retail market's going to be tremendously hard hit. So that's going to be troubling for anybody with serious retail exposure.
Yes, yes.
Well, I know you have to take off, so unless anybody else has questions they want to address to Denise, I'm going to let her go early. Anybody have a thought, question, idea, legally or otherwise? All right. Well, thank you, Denise. I appreciate you joining us and for your insight as always. With that, I will introduce Josh to talk a little bit about what's going on in the sales market. I've seen some things myself that have been kind of interesting. Oh, Bert, go ahead. You have to unmute yourself. Hold on. Bert, I can't hear you. Just 1 second. Unmute.
There we go.
There we
How's
are.
that?
Go ahead.
Okay. Phase 4.
Yes.
When they open up office buildings again, we reach phase 4.
Okay.
The question is, do you have any kind of idea, or are you getting any messages as to how many people will give up their summer cabins and everything else and move back into the city at that point, because the offices will open. They won't be as dense as they were obviously before, but there will be people coming in and possibly looking for apartments because they gave them up to move out there for the summer, fall, you know, and come back in the fall, winter. Any gut feeling for that there might be a surge for
John has a comment. Go ahead, John. You are.
I was talking to one of our residential tenants in North Beach a few days ago, and he works in finance in the financial district and has been working from home. And he's been told that even though his office can reopen, they're allowed to reopen, they're going to stay closed because of problems with elevator capacity in the building. Elevators now have a maximum capacity of 4 people, more or less. And so you can't operate a high rise with that kind of situation. So that's the kind of thing that is going to be an obstacle to offices reopening, I think, anytime soon.
JJ, can you hear me? Am I still on?
You're still on. Go ahead.
So sorry, I haven't left yet. I wanted to thank you too for the opportunity to be here with you. But I also have some comment on what John just said. It's also, I'm hearing a lot from my actual main tenants with employees. And the issue is that their employees don't want to come back to the office.
Right.
And it's not so much the tenants who are responsible for paying the rent. It's literally, as employers, they are very concerned about the liability when their employees are saying, you know what, I can work from home fine. I am not interested in coming back to the office. Are you okay with that? Right. So that's what I'm really seeing. And that's what's really causing the, oh my God, what are we going to do? We don't need all this office space. What do I do with my landlord? And that's what I've been seeing lately. I think people are getting pretty comfortable working from home.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting used to it, and it's certainly becoming the new standard. I don't know if it'll be forever like this, but while we have something to be afraid of, it's certainly preferable to going anywhere and being near anyone.
It'll be interesting to see what ADUs, you know, there's a huge influx of ADUs construction and recent state laws. And so will ADUs sort of become the home offices for many people? I mean, something to think about.
It could be. I mean, I think especially those kinds of units, a smart landlord might find a way to, you know, lease that space as an office, though the trouble is it's rent controlled, and you'd have to probably rent it as a lower rent product than you'd get for the unit. But if you want a temporary arrangement where you can let somebody go downstairs and use a studio apartment in the basement as a way to get out of their apartment, that might be useful for somebody who's going to stick around. But
Or for prospective owners, right?
yeah,
People purchasing properties, there's an ADU downstairs. They don't have to go into their office. They go from their apartment down to their ADU to work.
right. That'd
Or
also be a good arrangement.
yes.
Years ago, my friends and clients used to buy buildings so that they could use the basement for storage. Now it's offices. That's a higher use, I suppose.
Thanks, JJ. I'll sign off now. Take care.
Thank you, Denise. Thank you. All right. Well, with that, I will bring Josh in here. Josh, how are you today?
Good. How are you?
Pretty good. Pretty good. Happy Wednesday.
Happy Wednesday. I wanted to add one thing. I was talking to a colleague yesterday who owns a bunch of units in San Francisco, and he had a 3-bedroom unit that he listed last year for $5,500. He's now on the market for $4,500, so close to a 20% discount. He had 13 people show up, so he was like, "Oh, good. I'm gonna grab one of these guys," and nobody submitted an application.
Right.
And so, we were talking for a while, and what is that about? It's obviously a very nice unit, and the renters are in the driver's seat. I mean, they can wait for absolutely anything they want, and look for, they're shopping for fun in some ways. What's the best I can do? My question to you, or my thought is, at what point do you think people start thinking about just pulling their units completely for fear of setting in that lower rental amount in a tightly rent-controlled market like San Francisco? Where's that line at?
I think that what's happening now is people are starting to realize that this is the new normal. And I don't think we're going to get back to where we were. I just don't. It's going to be
eventually, but
it'll be. I mean, if you have to keep your unit off the market for a year, is that worth it?
Right.
No, it's not. I mean, I'd rather take a 10% reduction or even a 15 or 20% reduction than get zero. And I'm not sure anybody benefits from that, except that if you can hang on to a building for long enough and sell a fully vacant building. But even that, I mean, that's a rough calculation of how long can I afford the pain, right, of paying the carrying costs. So
anyway, that's just a side
thought.
But so I have a deal in the East Bay to share with everybody. Here, everybody can see that. You see it, JJ?
Yes.
Good. So, I'm still, the deals I think are going to be coming. I'm noticing San Francisco. I'm just seeing a lot of price drops in the investment space. So I do think there are more and more opportunities coming up that for cheaper buildings in San Francisco. I mean, these the rents are down. And if you're just going to have to bake those new numbers into the valuation of the building, and that's kind of what's happening. So there's all these hangers on for last year's prices that they're just not moving. So anyway, I still think there's nice opportunities coming up in San Francisco, but the East Bay, obviously, I've mentioned many times, as a rental market, is much more stable. There's much more demand. This is a deal that a colleague and friend of mine is selling. I'm listing it for him. This property is a funky property. It was built in 1906. When he bought it, he didn't even know what it legally was. We had to hire the city of Berkeley to do a deep dive into the historical records on the property to figure out what it was. Once we figured out what it was 3 units on the top floor and 1 large commercial space on the bottom floor. It's currently not configured that way. It's roughly 2 units up top, and it is a large commercial space down below. What's interesting about this property, it's 100%, it's a fixer. I think I've priced it to leave some value there for the investor to build on it. The yard is huge, so it's an 8,000 square foot lot. So right now, you know, the hot thing for housing is outdoor space. I mean, it's outdoor space, outdoor space. Everybody, the single family market is very strong because of this. So you have your own personal space, you have your own personal backyard, and rentals with outdoor space are doing better than rentals without. So this is an interesting deal in that you could potentially reconfigure it. It's legally 4 units. Taking away units in Berkeley is like taking away units in San Francisco. You can't do it. So this is a 4-unit property on this parcel. So one thought is putting ADUs on it, potentially 2 ADUs. So taking that top floor and making a unit, bottom floor, another unit, maybe converting the commercial to residential. And then 2 ADUs or 2 units up top, 1 unit converted down below, and then an ADU in the back. So it's, just pull up a couple of photos. And I'll just kind of run this while I'm talking. So it's you know, in the theme of add value deals, you know, Berkeley's a very strong rental market. It's a very strong single family home market. I don't think you can do condos here, but this is a nice opportunity. I think that, you know, take a little time to bring this back to the market. I'm going to take a you know, year and a half probably, to depending on what you would want to do. The more straightforward thing to do is just convert it to a kind of rentable fourplex with a large yard and good parking. It's in West Berkeley, so it's pretty hot location, desirable. So I like this deal in terms of the possibilities, kind of owner user opportunity, single family with extra units, outdoor space. So I'm bringing this out on Friday, and it'll be interesting to see all of the creative ideas that the developers and contractors come up with for it. I'm even thinking about buying it myself. So that's my deal.
Can you convert commercial units on the ground floor into residential with a reasonably, you know, reasonable process in Berkeley, or are they going to give you a hard time?
Probably a hard time. So you could potentially do shrink that commercial space, because I mean it's the whole floor, and they're high ceilings. I mean it's a ton of space, and it's a residential neighborhood. To have that size of commercial space actually doesn't make any sense. The neighborhood is zoned RH2, so this is being grandfathered in as a 4. I think you could probably shrink the commercial space and then convert the rest of it to living. The fact that you're right on the sidewalk there could pose some problems in terms of putting living space like that. But I think the deal here is you can't move this building. You can't tear it down. You can't move it. So you can definitely take advantage of all that space in the back. And yeah, I would certainly try to convert that commercial space.
So what has your client been doing with this property for?
So he bought it 6 years ago or so. I represented him on the purchase.
Right.
He paid $850 for it. I'm listed now at 1.1. He was like, I think I want to do, I want to develop it. And so we thought about developing it together. And then he was like, oh, I want to do a kind of a retreat, a healing center here. And he thought about doing that for a while. And then he was like, well, I don't want to be a landlord. And he kind of changed his mind a number of different times. He used it for storage. At the end of the day, it became a large storage yard. For all of his toys and items, but he he could never decide really what he wanted to do with it, and then he just decided recently. He's like, hey, I need to get out of this deal.
Just unload it.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
he's
it looks like
as you
it
can
needs to be
tell.
fully torn apart and start over again. But
Yeah,
it
you need to bring it to the studs.
could be nice.
Yeah, the foundation is workable, although it's original.
Workable.
Could be supported,
Oh man.
reinforced.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not a whole lot of weight on there with 2 stories like that, but it's funky, but it'll you know, from the developing side of my mind, I'm intrigued.
What's the square footage of the building?
About 4,000, 2,000 per
All
foot.
right. Yeah. Okay. Well, that sounds interesting.
Yeah.
That's a big opportunity. I'll be interested to ask you next week about how your first open houses went, what kind of feedback you're getting from prospective buyers. That's see what kind of interest there is in this kind of a project. I mean, you figure for the time it's going to take to do this project, by the time it's over, life should be back to normal and the students should be back on campus in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
It means the rental market will come back for West Berkeley. So there you go.
Fun fact on the building is there's the rumor is, and I've heard this for years actually, is the very first Black Panther meeting was held in this building.
Oh wow!
I don't dare share that with anybody at the city of Berkeley to slapping a landmark status on it and having a lot of problems. But it's a cool fun fact.
It'll be storage for the rest of time if that happens.
Yes, right, exactly.
Anyway, all right, well, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Anybody thoughts, ideas, questions, comments? Happy to have you all. Thanks for joining us for another call. I will look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great rest of your week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye now.